Happy Friday morning, everybody. Welcome to the Rotowire Fantasy Football Podcast, the Friday morning DFS version. I am Scott Jenstad, joined as always by Ryan Belongia on Friday mornings. We are sponsored by WinBet. We appreciate them for that their sponsorship all season long. We are in week 15. It's been a fun and crazy ride. This week is especially crazy. We have a ton of guys out for COVID. We have injury guys. We have teams that we don't know who they're going to play out there, but we're going to get you through the DFS slate. But first of all, Ryan, how are you this morning?
Oh, yeah, I'm good, Scott. Thanks. Weird week this week. I read yesterday over 100 players on the COVID list. So that'll have a lot of implications. And as far as the games go, just mostly low totals and weird spots. But yeah, we'll get into it. There's still some good spots to target. Excited to talk about it.
Yeah, I've been doing this multiple years now, and I've never had a week where there's not a total in a game over 48. It's crazy. The only high total game was last night. It was Kansas City and the Chargers, and for three quarters, everybody's like, "Oh well, so much for the high total." And then all of a sudden, there were 35 points in fourth quarter and overtime. It was a fun game. We have a couple Saturday games this week that are off the slate. Vegas and Cleveland, which is a huge COVID game. Who knows what happened there anyway? So probably best we don't have to break that one down. New England at Indy, fun game on Saturday night. And then Sunday night is New Orleans at Tampa, fun game there too. And Monday night is Minnesota and Chicago. Mentioned the only game over 50 was Kansas City and LA. That's been a long time since I can remember a week like that. Interesting week on DFS too. There's no running back on the slate over 7,800 and only one over 7,400. We have no, obviously there's no McCaffrey. There's no Cook. Eckler played last night. Just a lot of usually like the I'll just play the expensive running back stuff off the board this week, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think, so it's very different. You're right. I can't remember a week like this either. Just as far as those running backs go, I think that'll lead to people spending up at quarterback. There's also some cheap wide receivers. Where should we start? Let's, I guess, start at quarterback.
I'm going to jump in just real quick with the high totals. We mentioned that there's there's not a lot of games that are high. We do have a couple that are over 46. Atlanta and San Francisco's 46.5. Arizona, Detroit. I never thought we'd have Arizona, Detroit as the highest total on the slate. 47.5. Then we got like 6 games between 43 and 46, which will be games that you probably want to find some players in there. Then we have a couple of a few real low total ones. Tennessee at Pittsburgh is 42.5. Obviously, a lot's happened with those two teams this year that's made that total low. The Jets always here against Miami, 41.5. And we have an entry into the under 40 list right now. The old Army Navy level of points here. We got Houston to Jacksonville, 39.5. I guess they have to play each other at some point. And finally, here we are. But it's a week where we're going to have to find guys we like in games that are not expected to be 38, 35.
Yeah. There's not, we don't have like necessarily a competitive game that looks great for stacking. I guess maybe the Rams Seahawks would be the best one in terms of that. But I think, I'm looking at that Arizona game. They have a 30, implied total over 30, which is pretty clearly the highest and a great opponent in the Lions. And then the Bills are, sort of in a similar spot at home against Carolina. The Bills have a 27 or 28 total. But again, those games are, a good chance to blow out. So stacking is a little bit different this week. I think you can stack some of these teams with high totals, and you don't have to run it back if you don't want to. One, because there's a lot of value from other teams, from some of these, teams in less appealing spots. You can just plug that value in. And then, obviously you don't necessarily want to run it back if a team's going to get blown out, but there are options in some of these games. Is anyone sticking out to you that you're looking to target?
Yeah, it's interesting. We'll get to it, kind of getting some stacks and stuff, but I think the Atlanta San Francisco game has a chance to be interesting. It depends on if Atlanta can score early to get some points. The Niners kind of get going too, because the Niners get up. I think they're 9.5 point favorites. They will run the hell out of the ball. They'll just kind of they'll eat clock. They'll hand it off to whatever running back might be back there. We don't really know yet who's going to be. We'll talk about that when we talk about running backs. But I think that game, if Matt Ryan can pick apart the Niners secondary a little bit, which Cincinnati. I'm a Niners fan. I'm rooting for the Niners, but Cincinnati was weirdly frustrating last week if you were a fantasy person because they didn't do anything for 3 quarters. They didn't challenge the Niners cornerbacks, even though there were 3 of them out. They didn't challenge them on the edges at all. In the fourth quarter came, they're down 14. They start doing that, and they scored easy. And then even in overtime, down the field, got to the 20, ran the ball twice, didn't get a third down, kick a field goal, ended up losing the game. I feel like they really let the Niners off the hook for a secondary that is really, really, really bad right now. Jamar Chase had 2 touchdowns and dropped a third. I don't know if it was dropped, but just dropped a third one that hit the ground a little bit. But I just feel like they let him off the hook. And if Ryan and the Falcons could do that a little bit, they don't have nearly the weapons, obviously, that Cincinnati does. But I think the game could get a little bit back and forth, but it depends on that first 20 minutes a lot to see if we can get some game flow going.
Yeah, that game. Yeah, it's a great spot for San Francisco.
Who suddenly has a lot of weapons that we can pick from. We got to figure out. So I kind of like slates like this. There's not that obvious, whatever it is, Kansas City and whoever game that everybody's going to go with. And we a couple weeks ago we had the one game that stuck out. So I kind of like it. You got to really break down individual players rather than games, and I kind of appreciate that. But let's jump into who we think is going to be popular, who we think is going to be the highly rostered players. Starting at quarterback, you mentioned Arizona has the highest team total. I think under 8,000. I think a lot of people are just going to go to Kyler Murray. No touchdowns on Monday against the Rams, but 383 yards passing, 61 yards rushing. He looked healthier than he has in a while. He was running around a little bit. No DeAndre Hopkins. DeAndre Hopkins is out for the rest of the regular season, so won't be playing here. But a matter of if Arizona will kind of shut it down if they have a big lead or if they let Kyler do his thing. Great matchup. Detroit's 31st in the league, 8.2 yards per attempt. They should dominate. I assume they'll dominate, even though it's on the road. It's just a matter of, how do you think the second half of this game looks? Are you optimistic enough about that you get a Kyler in your lineup?
Yeah, I guess I'm optimistic about the second half, but I'm also for cash games, I'm not really worried about it. It's just such a good spot, and they should. Be able to, they should put up enough points, even if they only go for 3 quarters.
Right. Because that's, if they're up 35-10, they had to get to 35 somehow. So that's
right.
Right. James Conner's questionable as of right now. That might help Kyler a little bit at the goal line too. I mean, it just seems like a spot that's pretty easy for it's going to be hard for Kyler to be completely a zero out there. He's going to have to be pretty. The floor is pretty darn good.
Yeah. So I think. I agree with you. I think Kyler is where I would go first at quarterback. I think Josh Allen is in play as well.
Does the foot worry you at all, or as long as he's good to go and out there, you're fine with it?
Yeah, as long as he's good to go, as long as he's active and playing, I'm fine with it. But it worries me a little as far as his rushing upside. If it is actually bothering him, I think. That would probably just lead me to go with Kyler in cash, just for $200 cheaper. Like I mentioned at the start, I think this is a week where we spend up at quarterback. It hasn't necessarily been like that for the last few weeks, but we have a lot of value at running back and receiver. So I think, take your pick on Josh Allen or Kyler. I think those are the 2 spots. Looking a little bit lower. I can't trust Jalen Hurts' ankle. But
worries me too. And if he's not running a lot, at least with Josh Allen, even if he doesn't run a ton, you've got so much other stuff he can do, and he's got receivers and all that. If Hurts can't run, that floor is literally nowhere. So it's that concerns me. I think enough that I'm probably going to stay away there.
Me too. And I see Hurts. He's got a good projection, and he's projected to be more popular than I thought too, at least as of now. This is Friday morning, but
right.
The ankle just worries me too much. Like you said, he relies so much on his rushing upside, at least for fantasy purposes. I think if I was in that range, I'd just go to Dak, 6,500. It's a good price for Dak. He hasn't been great recently, 12 points and 11 points in back-to-back games.
I felt the one last week too. That one hurt.
Yeah, I think a lot of people felt that one. but still, like 6,500 for Dak, it's a good price. It's a decent matchup. So I think, you're okay going there. Again, I'd probably just find the money to get up to one of those top guys. If you want to go cheap,
that's my question is, if you do go cheap, where's your spot this week?
I think it's Tua. I mean, I could be sold on something else. I know Tua just lost Waddle, which is a little bit of a downgrade, definitely, but the matchup at home to the Jets is just amazing. And Tua's actually looked pretty good recently. Although like his fantasy numbers, he hasn't topped, he hasn't hit 20 in the last 5 weeks. But again, like just 5,700 and such a good matchup. I think you could go to Tua. Again, I think you might be giving up too much this week going down here though. Is there anyone that sticks out for you?
In like in a stacking environment, there's a couple we'll talk about, but yeah, Tua was the one that stuck out to me. Like if you wanted to go cheap, he was 27 for 33 against the Jets in week 11 with 2 touchdowns, 273 yards. The only thing I do like with Tua is the number of passes they are throwing. He's thrown 31, 33, and 41 the last 3 weeks. So at least they are using him a lot, letting him air it out a little bit. It's a lot of short passes, I know, and no Waddle. No Waddle does just kind of reel me back in a little bit on him. I really like Jalen Waddle, and there's a guy that can hit the short pass and all of a sudden take it somewhere. So I do like that. We have Devontae Parker back, which helps. He played last week, but the floor seems pretty solid. I don't think you're getting a lot of upside with Tua. I think for me, he feels like a kind of a cash game floor guy if you want to save some money. But like in a tournament, I don't know if the blow up ability is quite there.
Yeah, no, I agree totally. The one thing I would say for tournaments is right now the Dolphins have all of their running backs either injured or on the COVID list.
We might get some Duke Johnson again in our life.
Yeah, like Myles Gaskin could be back. And then, it'd just be like business as usual for Miami. But if Gaskin was out and they had Duke, who's more of a pass catcher as it is, then I think I would have a little bit of interest in Tua for tournaments. You mentioned those pass attempts. If they didn't have any running backs, I definitely expect Tua to throw it 35 times in a great matchup. So if Gaskin is out, I could see myself looking to Tua for some tournament lineups, but otherwise, no, I agree with you. I'm not sure the upside's there.
So we mentioned running backs. There's not a lot of uber expensive stud guys. So I want to drop down a little bit in terms of popularity. I think that the 2 names that I've been hearing and I think will be pretty popular this week. There's probably actually 3 of them probably, but James Robinson is an interesting case. He's 5,400. I mean, this is a guy that was really, really good last year. Had a couple of good games this year, and then kind of got lost in the Urban Meyer mess. Doghouse a little bit, fumbled once. His last 2 weeks have been horrible. He's been 8 rushes for 24 yards. Last week he was 6 carries for 4 yards. 6 carries, can't get in the rhythm. I get that. Urban Meyer's obviously gone. Darrell Bevel came out and said he's our lead running back. We're going to use him as such. Bevel likes to run the ball. The matchup here is the key. They're playing Houston. Houston's giving up 4.9 yards per carry, second worst in the NFL, 19.8 fantasy points per game to running backs. There's also a lot of buzz on Robinson, like, oh, he's freed now. There's a lot of free James Robinson stuff when Urban got fired. And then the other one in the exact same price, 5,100, is Rashard Penny, who was incredible last week. 16 for 137, 2 touchdowns, best game of his career. Pete Carroll, another coach here, said publicly, likes to run it. He's our guy. We're going to see what he can do. So he's obviously the lead back right now. The Rams, usually good against the run, 3.7 yards per carry, but have 25 guys, I think, is up now on the COVID list. So we don't know who the heck's going to be playing for the Rams. You got to think of that list. There's probably some guys on defense that are missing. I know Von Miller's on the list. Jalen Ramsey's on that list right now. Who else? Who knows who else is on that list? But those are the 2 guys that jumped out to me. Like, these prices are really cheap. How popular do you think either of those guys are going to be?
I think James Robinson is going to be very popular.
Yeah.
And rightfully so for the reasons you mentioned. He gets a bump now that Urban Meyer is gone. He also looks good because he's the cheapest he's been all season, like by a considerable amount. He was priced in the mid 6Ks for a while. Like you mentioned, it's one of the best matchups possible. Rashard Penny ran wild against the Texans last week. And then I think Carlos Hyde's going to be out with a concussion. So that kind of just shores up the work for Robinson even more. So, I'm comfortable just plugging Robinson in for cash. He seems like the if not the best, like the second best value at running back. As far as Penny goes, yeah, that's an interesting one. It does depend on the defense, because the Rams actually jumped in front of Tampa as the number 1 rated rush defense. So I would have to look at who's out on that defensive line. Von Miller and Jalen Ramsey being out doesn't necessarily hurt their run defense, but if some of those other guys are out, then yeah, I would look to Rashard Penny. Otherwise, I think that's one I could fade. It's tough to trust, especially because
it's Rashard Penny too.
That's a good point. It's Rashard Penny, yeah, for one, and they're likely to be trailing. So I definitely prefer Robinson there. I think who is going to be the other popular guy is either Darrell Henderson or Sony Michel. I think Darrell Henderson.
I said there was a third, and Michel was the one that I was thinking of at 5,800.
Yeah, either him or Henderson. I've heard that Henderson's going to be activated off the COVID list, even if he's not. So that him and Sony are the same price. So yeah, one of those.
If he's activated, are you concerned that Michel plays enough that maybe it kind of kills both of them?
Yeah, a little. Yeah, a little. But for the most part, McVay likes to use one running back a lot. Yeah. So if Henderson's active, I'm just going to trust that he's going to get most of the work. And he's under 6K. So, if he was mid 6Ks, Sony being there to steal some touches, yeah, I would consider it more, but under 6K is just such a good price tag for the starting running back on the Rams in this spot. So at least for cash games, I think I'm starting with the Rams running back and then James Robinson.
I think I'm a little more off it than you are if Henderson plays. I think I'm a little bit worried that maybe we get in a situation where Sony steals more carries than we want. But I do get it. And your point on McVay is good. He does like to have one guy. But I think Sony's done enough these last couple of games that I don't think they're just going to be like, oh, you're going to get 3 carries this game. So I think, and coming off the COVID, who knows how his conditioning is, all that kind of stuff. I just wonder if Henderson gets fed. I would definitely go Michel if Henderson doesn't play. I think I'm off if both play. I think I'm just a little too concerned we might see a split carry situation there.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think I'm off for tournaments. I would still do it in cash games.
Okay. Let's look at receiver real quick. We'll do a segment later on kind of some of the mid-range guys. I think mid-range receivers are a really fascinating area this week. But let's start at the top first, and then I want to talk about a kind of expensive guy and then a really cheap guy who I think can be popular. At the top, we've got Cooper Kupp. We have Davante Adams, who are both on heaters right now. They're both really good all year, but both guys are hot right now. And Cooper Kupp, last Monday night, 13 catches, 123 yards and touchdown. It was funny. I had a season-long game where I needed Kupp to do well just to kind of advance to the next round. And I was like, so Monday night's always tough, but 3 minutes in the game, I'm like, oh, this is gonna be easy. He had 5 catches in the first drive. I was like, all right, we're good. And you usually got to sweat that Monday nighter, and I actually had Beckham too, and I was like, oh, this is suddenly gonna be really easy, but. Kupp is just every single week. It's crazy. The receivers have bad weeks. Receivers have down weeks. Receivers have 4 for 50 yards in a week. And it's just Kupp has not. I mean, he has 20 more targets than any receiver in the NFL. He has 19 more catches than any receiver in the NFL. It's just as good as every other receiver has been. And there's a lot of guys, Justin Jefferson, Davante Adams, who we'll talk about in a second. Kupp's just dominant. Him and Stafford have a connection that is just no way to deny it at this point. I know we joke about them having breakfast together and all that, but Kupp's 9,000 has been a lock every single week. Davante Adams, 8,900, has been on fire last week. 7 for 115, 2 touchdowns, 8 for 104, 10 for 121, and 2 touchdowns the last 3 weeks. Davante Adams has double digits in PPR scoring in 26 straight games. Just a bonkers number. The Ravens secondary has so many injuries, so many guys out. Marlon Humphrey's out for the year. They have a whole bunch of guys banged up. You obviously can't play both these guys. An extreme lineup, you probably could, but what do you do in picking between these two dudes? You just don't worry about it. Just pick one.
Yeah, you can't go wrong with either of them. I mean, there's nothing I can really add to that. These are the top 2 players in fantasy football. Kupp, I'll go with Kupp. He's been unbelievable. He just always seems to be open, short routes and long routes.
And like Robert Woods is out, and he's still just open every time. I mean, there's no Beckham this week, which maybe hurts him a little bit, but maybe you get a few more targets. Like I agree with you. I just don't think they're both awesome. They're both studs. We're going to play like maybe you can go with the fact that Adams is outside in a colder game and a weather, but like Green Bay doesn't care about that really, and Kupp is inside against Seattle. But I think they're both good matchups, both stud players. I mean, it's hard to get upset. Be picking between them. You should be good either way.
You're definitely playing one of them, at least for cash games, for sure. And I think Kupp is just slightly safer. He should get more targets. I actually think Beckham being out. I kind of like Beckham being out. It's guaranteed, it's guaranteed double-digit targets for Kupp. He's already getting that, but I mean, he should get 15 in this spot. It's tough not to go with Kupp. Yeah, it actually feels like he should be a little bit more expensive. We saw him up to 9.6, but he's just scoring high 20s, 30 fantasy points every week. I mean, it's crazy to expect that from a guy, but I expect that.
Yeah, it's a wild run, and we talked about there's no expensive running backs this week, so there is the salary. You can get there pretty easily. Dropping down a little bit, I want to talk about a guy who I think is become a weirdly just an incredible floor guy. At 7,500 is Diontae Johnson in Pittsburgh. He was only 5 for 76 last week, but 10 more targets. We talked about Devontae's streak. Deontay's going to be tough. He's not that far behind him. 16 straight games with double-digit points in PPR scoring. Tennessee's allowing 8.3 yards per target to wide receivers. Diontae Johnson, the last 5 weeks in targets, 13, 13, 14, 11, and 10. I mean, this is the elite level of targets. Great floor. He's probably might have the second best floor in the NFL receivers to Kupp. I mean, Devontae's a little more, below, obviously a better player and more upside. But in terms of floor, Deontay's kind of right there. And 7,500 seems like a pretty good price for him this week.
Yeah, it does. And it's a decent spot. About 7,500. It is the most expensive that he's been this season. Yeah. Last week he was 7,100, but every other week he's been in the 6Ks. So it's a pretty sizable bump. You're right. The floor, though, the floor is great. It's double-digit targets every week, and it's a pretty good spot. Roethlisberger and the Steelers are much better at home. So I really I like going to Deontay. It feels really safe. I don't know if you're going to have the money to get there if you roster Kupp and an expensive quarterback, at least for cash games. I mean, you might be able to, but if you are, I'd be happy going there, I guess. It feels safe, and he has upside too.
Yeah. So we're going to do the mid-range here in a second, but in terms of cheap receivers, it feels to me like there's a couple guys down here that stick out. Usually we're trying to find guys under 5,000, this I can kind of squint and make this work. There are a couple of guys this week that seem like they might be pretty darn popular. The first is Devontae Parker with Jalen Waddle out. He is 4,300 for the Dolphins in a great matchup against the Jets. He played 40 snaps last week, was 5 for 62 on 5 targets, so got involved last week. Probably steps up a little bit. It's Devontae Parker. He could get hurt on the first play. We would not be surprised. There always is that risk. The Jets are bottom, kind of bottom half in yards allowed per target to wide receiver. There, nothing that scares you there. The other one is Gabriel Davis at 3,700 in Buffalo. We talked about Josh Allen earlier. Emmanuel Sanders is out. They've said that Gabriel Davis can start. They kind of keep Cole Beasley in the slot, and Davis will start outside next to Stephon Diggs. 3,700 on this good of an offense against Carolina. He had 8 targets last week, a season high for him. Played 100% of dropbacks that Josh Allen had. So after Sanders left, he was the guy that was in there every week. He's a talented guy. I remember at University of Central Florida, he was really good. I think these two guys, we'll talk about some other cheap guys later. We do that, but those two guys stick out to me as a little better and safer than most of the options we usually get down the really cheap range.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Much safer than what we usually see each week. As far as Devontae Parker goes, to me, that's good chalk this week. It's weird to say with Parker and his sort of unpredictability and his injury history, but that price tag, the matchup, and Waddle being out, it's just too good to pass up, and it does feel safe also. With Waddle out, Parker should be 6K in a spot at home against the Jets. He's almost sure to see 10 targets. plenty of touchdown upside. Yeah, like I really like Parker. I think that's good chalk. I'm going to roster a lot of Parker. Gabriel Davis too. Yeah, 3,700 and just
I couldn't believe when I clicked on him how cheap he was. I was like, he's gonna be like 4,500. I was like, oh my gosh, 37. Like that's oof.
And playing for arguably the best, passing offense on the slate at 3,700 and playing 100% of Josh Allen's dropbacks last week. Like you said, Beasley will stay in the slot. I mean, that's what he does. Gabe Davis is going to be out there and he's going to be targeted, and it's a pretty good spot for Buffalo. So yeah, I really like Gabe Davis too. I'm going to have trouble rostering any other cheap receivers with those two there. Now, most of the tournaments I play are either single entries, 3 max or 5 max. So I'm okay with rostering the better chalk in that cheap range. If you're playing, the bigger tournaments, maybe the $3.20 max or even the Millie Maker, any of the largest field tournaments, then maybe I would get off those guys because it would be really good leverage for tournaments. But in the smaller field stuff, yeah, that's where I'm going. These are 2 great spots. I couldn't agree with you more. It's much safer than this range normally is.
Yeah, and we'll talk about some other guys down there, but like those 2 guys stick out as like these are not normally guys under 4,500. So let's get in the mid-range of receivers. I think is fascinating this week. But first, a note from our sponsors at WynnBET. There's one thing we appreciate here at Rotowire. It's making good decisions, and even more so, making the right decision. Listen up. I have an incredible offer for you with Rotowire's newest partner, WynnBET, the premier digital casino and sportsbook app. WynnBET is now the exclusive sponsor for Rotowire's fantasy podcast. WynnBET brings you all the latest action with a user-friendly interface, moneyline bets, boosted parlays, over-unders, round robins, live betting, and so much more all at your fingertips. Want a break from sports betting? Head into WynnBET's digital casino and take a spin on roulette, double down on blackjack, slam the slots, or try your hand at Baccarat. WynnBET is currently available in 6 states: Colorado, Indiana, Michigan, New Jersey, Tennessee, Virginia, all while rapidly expanding. At WynnBET, the possibilities are limitless. WynnBET is currently offering all Rotowire listeners a risk-free bet up to $500 on your first wager. Download WynnBET now. That's WYNNBET. WynnBET, the exclusive partner for Rotowire's fantasy podcasts. So, Ryan, I want to talk a little bit about the mid-range receiver this week. I think it's a really interesting range in terms of I think there's a couple guys here who are really chalky, but I think like the 5,000 to 6,500 range, let's call it, is going to be really instrumental in kind of finding guys in here that you want to, we talked about the expensive guys, the cheap guys, finding someone here that's going to do really well, or we have a couple guys who want to play 4 receivers. I think it's going to be really important. First of all, I think the chalk guys. I think that Van Jefferson at 5,600 is going to be very popular. There's no Odell Beckham Jr. Van Jefferson had the long touchdown last week. I know he only had 3 targets. He's had a lot of targets before that, but been really involved in the Rams offense pretty much the last 6 weeks. He's been a big part. You take OBJ out, Robert Woods is obviously out. I think he's really popular at 5,600. The other guy who I think in here might be popular just because of the low price and the big name is DK Metcalf, 6,200 in the same game at the Rams. Tyler Lockett went on the COVID list. There's some talk he might be able to get off of it, but if he doesn't play, there's no Jalen Ramsey. I know he was only 4 for 43 last week, and he's been, he doesn't have 60 yards in the game since week 7, which is a crazy run for DK Metcalf. But no Lockett. Metcalf had a touchdown back on a penalty last week. It feels like it's about to happen. So I think those 2 guys will be pretty popular. I want to get your feel on. You think that's going to be some good popularity, or you think you're going to go elsewhere? And if so, elsewhere, where would it be in this range?
Oh, yeah. Well, DK really hurt my feelings last week. You mentioned he had that touchdown called back.
Yep.
Then they tried to get him a touchdown on a little slant from about the 3-yard line that Russ just threw right behind him. He was wide open.
So bad. It could have been such a big game.
But if Lockett is out, yeah, I think you got to have some interest in DK, especially with Jalen Ramsey not there. Yeah, it all makes sense. They're trying to get him the ball more. I understand that. So I'd like DK if Lockett is out. Van Jefferson, yeah, I think he'll be the chalky one in that range, and rightfully so. Touchdown in 3 straight weeks. No Odell, no Robert Woods. Like you mentioned, only 3 targets last week, but in the 4 previous games, he was averaging 8 targets. So I'd expect something like that without Beckham in there. Just like a really good young player, a good deep threat. It was cool. After his touchdown last week, there's a video of him coming over to the sidelines, thanking Sean McVay for the opportunity, thanking him for believing in him. Yeah, it was cool to see. Some guys in that range that might be less popular. There's a few of them that are in good spots. I really like the Cardinals wide receivers without DeAndre Hopkins. AJ Green, I know that's not 5K, but he's 4.9. So it's
close enough.
Yeah. He saw 10 targets last week. Kyler was just looking his way first every time.
Even with Hopkins in there, like before he was playing last week, it seemed like every time he dropped back, it was AJ Green again. It's funny because they're number 18, number 10. You're like, oh, there's DeAndre. You're like, oh, nope, AJ Green again.
Yeah, and I know people have some sort of reservations about AJ Green, I guess because of his age and injury history, but he's looked pretty good for most of the season. He looked pretty good on Monday night, and Detroit has given up huge games to receivers this season. So I'm going to take Kyler Murray's number one wide receiver for 4,900. That looks pretty good to me. I also think it's a great spot for Christian Kirk. He should see a bunch of targets playing in the slot. Again, same with Green, amazing matchup, and no Hopkins. They also have banged up running backs. So I think the first place I'm looking is these Arizona guys. What about you in that range, Scott? What do you like?
Yeah, I did like the Arizona guys too. I think Kirk will probably be more popular than Green, just like you said. I think people are a little wary of AJ Green, but there's a number of guys in this range. I think if you want to get away from Jefferson and Metcalf, there's a lot of ways to go. It's kind of a fun range. I think that Brandon Cooks is very much live right now. It's weird. We talked earlier in the year about, as long as Tyrod Taylor's in, Brandon Cooks will be good, but he's been really good the last couple games with Davis Mills. He was 8 for 101, 11 targets last week. This is Houston's always in a good game script. I mean, they're always trailing, but they're at Jacksonville. They are a little bit of an underdog. I know it's Jacksonville. Who knows what to expect there, but like the matchup's good. It's going to be a little bit back and forth game. I think both teams have nothing to lose. Maybe they air it out a little bit, but I think Brandon Cooks is safe to see, double-digit targets, which is hard to find in this range. And the other guy in here that is the same price at 1,500 is Russell Gage. I think that we talked before about the Niners cornerbacks just can't guard guys right now. Dante Johnson's out. We're down to Josh Norman and whoever else, maybe Emmanuel Mosley is out. They just don't. They were not great before, and now they just have a lot of guys that are hurt. So I think Russell Gage was only 4 for 64 last week on 6 targets, but had a huge week the week before. I just think the Niners are 27th in points per game to wide receivers. I just don't think they can guard receivers right now. Russell Gage is not the Jamar Chase we had last week or Metcalf or Lockett maybe a couple weeks before that when Seattle beat them. But I think Gage at 1,500, we'll see a guy that might approach double-digit targets and could get loose. I think that the Niners cornerbacks just can't guard anybody right now. And I try and hide when I watch games. I'm like, I hope the other coach doesn't realize this, but you got to think that Matt Ryan knows, where the weaknesses are. You're not going to run against the Niners. They'll probably throw to Cordell Patterson a little more too, but I think that Gage is in a good spot here to really, be really solid with some potential upside there too.
Yeah. So I want to piggyback on that on your Brandon Cooks call, because I was one of those guys that said, I would prefer to roster him with Tyrod Taylor. And I at least was wrong about that. Or I'd rather roster him with Davis Mills.
It's been weird. Like he's been good with Mills the last couple games.
Mills started, I think, 14 of 14 last week against the Seahawks. So I'm okay with going to Cooks for double-digit targets. Another guy, I just can't quit Julio Jones when he's the number one receiver and he's 5,400. I've got to mention it. He would have played more last week if they weren't blowing out Jacksonville. I'd expect him to play more this week, and they just don't have any weapons still without A.J. Brown and without Derrick Henry, and Pittsburgh's given up Pittsburgh's defense has gotten crushed for the last month.
Yeah.
So I see Julio Jones getting more targets. I see him getting some end zone targets, and I don't think people are going to roster him. So I don't really mind that either.
Yeah, this range is great. I mean, we got T. Higgins is still 6,500, and he was great again last week. He has 3 straight 100-yard games. Brandon Ayuk is 6,300. He had a touchdown last week, 6+ targets in 6 of 7 games. That one scares me a little bit more with both Kittle and Deebo Samuel active, but they have been looking to Ayuk a lot. I mean, 11 targets last week. I think Deebo had 1. So it's like it's very strange how it's kind of shifted a little bit. But that one makes me a little bit more worried if the Niners do get up, and with the 2 other spots. But then the last guy I want to talk about in this range, who I think is interesting, at 5,900, Chase Claypool. A ton of talk about all the mistakes he made last week. He had a drop pass. He had that 4th down where he celebrated rather than taking the ball back to the referee or the umpire there. but he was still 8 for 93 on 9 targets. He has 8+ targets in 3 of his last 4 games. We talked about Deontay Johnson earlier, but Ben's going to throw the ball. They're going to fling it around a little bit. It's not always deep, but there's a lot of targets there. Claypool's weird. He had 11 touchdowns last year. I mean, we talked about he's a touchdown guy. He can score at a time. Has 1 this year. You got to figure that that's got to be coming a little bit. His snaps are down a little bit the last couple weeks. He's had that turf toe thing. Maybe they're managing a little bit. When he's in, they're using him a lot. And I don't think anybody's going to play Claypool. Like, the narrative around him is so negative right now that people are going to be like, I'll play Marquise Brown. I'll play DK Metcalf. I'll play Brandon Cooks instead. And Claypool goes really, really under-owned this week in a tournament. I think you might get him at 3 or 4%. I think that's a really spicy one with a guy that is getting targets and has some upside to score some touchdowns too.
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned Claypool. I'm 100% on board with that. It's a good price tag. You mentioned 8 targets in 3 out of the last 4 weeks, and that TD regression has got to hit soon. He's got big play upside. You can see 100 yards and a touchdown in this spot, and now he's under 6K. That's a really good call. Great leverage for tournaments with Claypool.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I always like when you get a receiver that has some negative narrative around him. It seems like those guys take that personally, and I think that Claypool's got something to prove this week, and I think we're going to see it in a game that I think the Tennessee defense does not scare me very much, so I think that's one that could work too. So good stuff there. I love the mid-range this week. There are so many options to pick from, and I always like when you get that. There's so many ways to go. You have to really figure out what's right. I think I'm going to end up playing 2 guys in that range. I think I play when in a lineup where I play 4 receivers. I'm gonna take 2 guys that we mentioned there and kind of go with that. So let's talk about a couple of game stacks this week. You go first. Where are you looking at? We talked about a lot of players already, but where are you looking to kind of stack some quarterback receiver stuff this week?
Okay, the first place is Arizona. I'll just start there because I just talked about the receivers. With Hopkins out, I think Green and Kirk are in good spots. Kyler obviously is a great play. So I think it just makes sense to stack them up. Going against the Lions it's just too good of a spot. We've seen passing games destroy the Lions all season. And I actually like the fact that Hopkins is out because normally that's what prevents me from rostering Kyler, is because he's not a guy that normally peppers one receiver with targets. But with Hopkins not in there and with the running backs banged up, I think 1 or 2 of these guys is going to see plenty of targets and have a big game. You can even toss Zach Ertz in there. He gets a little bump without Hopkins, and it's a good matchup for him too. And if you want to run it back, there are a couple options. You don't have to, but Amon-Ra St. Brown, 12 targets in back-to-back weeks. I mean, that's a lot of targets. 18 catches in back-to-back weeks. Goff has spoke very highly of him publicly recently. He seems to, obviously he loves throwing to him. So you can run it back there. Maybe sort of a less obvious, less popular run back if you want to punt all the way down at tight end. TJ Hawkinson is now out the season. Brock Wright saw 5 targets last week and he's 2,800. Again, you don't have to run these stacks back when you play a team that's a big favorite, but Detroit does have options. The other game is a little bit a more competitive game, maybe a better target for stacking a game both ways. I think the Rams Seahawks is probably my favorite one. Again, I want to roster Cooper Kupp. Odell Beckham being out makes it easier to find the second guy. You can go to Van Jefferson, or I like going to Higbee. I think Beckham being out should mean a few more targets for Higbee. And then you can run it back with Seattle guys, especially if Lockett's out. These Seattle guys look good for run backs, both DK and then I believe D Eskridge. The minimum price, $3K if Lockett was out. He'd be the one to see a benefit, but also Gerald Everett would see a big benefit if Lockett is out. And then just a couple things about that game. So since Russ came back 5 weeks ago, Seattle has actually picked up the pace. They're playing at the 6th fastest situation neutral pace in the league since Russ came back. And that goes up to the 4th fastest in the league when they're trailing. Another thing that makes passing stacks stand out about this game is that the Rams have the number 1 run defense and the Seahawks have the number 4 run defense. So it all, both teams playing fast, both teams struggling to run, appealing options on both sides. So yeah, that game looks good to me too. What about you, Scott? Which games or game do you like?
Yeah, you sold that Rams Seattle one really well. You also got Freddie Swain in there, who's another like you get 3,000. Him and Estridge, like I don't know how you pick between them, but like having options at 3,000 at receiver in a game stack is just really really nice. I think I'm going back to Dallas this week. I think Dak let me down last week, but I like the price drop. 6,500 for Dak Prescott seems really good to me. You get a nice break off him from Allen and Kyler Murray. 3 of the 5 games, or 3 of the 4 of the 6, whatever it is, he's only had a couple good ones that have been bad since the injury. It's been a little bit rough. Last 3 games and 3 of the last 5, he's under 240 yards and 1 touchdown. But I like the matchup against the Giants. He had 302 yards and 3 touchdowns against them in week 5. The Dallas implied total, like we talked about implied totals, their implied total is 27.5, which is among the highest as we get, just a little bit lower than Buffalo and Arizona, the teams you mentioned earlier. So, like, there's points here. No Tyron Smith matters. I do get that. Missing their left tackle is a big thing here, but I just like the weapons too. Like, he has 3 receivers healthy. Pollard and Zeke are not really healthy. Like, Zeke was out there all last week, and he just doesn't look like the same guy right now. CeeDee Lamb was only 7 for 61 last week, but 10 targets, had 15 rushing yards too. If they get him a couple carries, I really like that also. 23 targets the last couple of weeks. Hasn't hit 100 yards since week 8. Like, we feel like we're due for a big CeeDee Lamb game. He's 7,400. If you want to go down to Amari Cooper, he's 6,400. Michael Gallup is playable, 5,500. He is 5 for 60 last week, but 9 targets. His targets the last 4 weeks have been really good. I just think that Dallas is due for one of those games. I want to check weather on this one. New York in December, you get some wind in that stadium, which is always a little bit concerning. But I think I'm going back to this. I think they're due a really nice passing game, and you just have so many weapons. Like, it just can happen so easily. And the other one is, it's Green Bay. I think that we talked about Devontae Adams earlier. You throw him with Rodgers. There's been so much talk about Rodgers off the field that we've kind of lost. The last 3 weeks have been really, really good. 384 yards, 307 yards, 341 passing yards the last 3 weeks with 10 touchdowns, touchdown passing, 1 touchdown rushing, so 11 total touchdowns. The Ravens are, like I said, are beat up in the secondary. No Marlon Humphrey. They're kind of hanging on for dear life right now on defense with all the injuries. It's kind of a shame. They're allowing like 17 passing points per game to opposing quarterbacks. So this is a spot that Rodgers could get well. If Lamar, I'd want Lamar to play because I want a little bit of comeback there, just hoping that Baltimore could stay in the game. But Rodgers Adams, like, it seems easy and simple, but we mentioned all the other options. I don't think they're really that highly owned this week, and I think that you can always go right with that matchup.
Yeah, I like both those calls, especially Dallas. I'm glad you brought up Dallas. I can add just a couple things there. Dallas games average the second most amount of plays in the league, and they've actually averaged 130 plays per game this season, which is the second most in the league. They're actually averaging more than that the last 4 weeks. They've now passed Tampa as the fastest offense in the league, and they're second in the league in pass rate behind Brady and the Buccaneers. So this game should have plenty of plays. Dallas should be passing the ball. It's good salary on Dak. Yeah, that's a really good call. I like the Cowboys this week.
Any sneakier stacks before we jump into running backs and receivers? Anybody that, like, you could figure out a way to maybe your third lineup in a tournament? Anything sneaky you're going to go with? I got one.
Okay. So I want to mention, if I'm going to mention one, it's going to be one that I would actually play in a significant tournament. And I'm not sure that I see one. Like I mentioned at the very start, I'd consider Tua, Parker, Gesicki stacks if depending on the Dolphins running back situation. But yeah, I don't know. Let's hear yours.
I could see that. I could see that too. We talked about Tua earlier. We talked about Devontae Parker earlier. I think the 49ers are kind of a sneaky stack this week, especially if Eli Mitchell does not play. If they don't have somebody they're going to hand the ball off to 27 times. Garoppolo is only 5,800. Like, I'm not the biggest Jimmy Garoppolo guy. Obviously, I'm a big Niners fan, but like I find a lot to critique with this game. I think he's too much of a one-read guy, but like it's fantasy. They're playing the Falcons. We saw a couple weeks ago, like you and I were both like, I don't really know if I like Cam Newton in this spot, but it was against the Falcons, so it kind of worked. You've got lots of options. You can play Deebo Samuel, nobody's going to own Deebo Samuel this week. He's 8,200. He's way overpriced. Everybody's talking about the fact that the rushing touch hasn't been there, but he has three catches the last 3 weeks. Nobody's going to have him. Kittle's expensive too. Like, I think it's going to be hard for people to get to him at 70. I think he's 7,500. And then you got Ayuk too, like 11 targets last week. I think there's a lot of options to go with. Jimmy has 299 and 296 passing yards the last couple of weeks. Doesn't have more than 2 touchdowns in a game, but he can get there in the right situation. Again, it's a spot where I'd rather do it if Mitchell does not play. That way, if you want to play Deebo, at least you get the rushing yards too. The key for me with this game is that Garoppolo struggles when anybody's in his face. Like, you could see if his first guy's not there, the rush comes, he takes sacks, he's done. Atlanta is last in the NFL in both pressure rate and number of sacks. So he should have plenty of time to throw. If you want to get sneakier and you're multi-entering something, it's your $3 tournaments, that kind of thing. I think this stack has actually some upside and some decent floor. I think it works pretty well. The hardest part of it is picking which pass catcher to go with.
Yeah. So I really like the Niners. I'm glad you brought up that stat about the Falcons defensive line, because this game has the biggest offensive line, defensive line mismatch of any game on Sunday. It also has the biggest mismatch the other way, is in terms of the Niners defensive line versus the Falcons offensive line. So I think it's a really tough spot for the Falcons and a great spot for the Niners. I agree with you. If Elijah Mitchell is out, I would like stacking up the Niners. I just don't want to run it back with any Falcons. So, I mean, you don't have
to. I think Gage is workable, but I'd probably do it with Gage if I did. But yeah, I certainly. I don't know how they're going to use Cordell Patterson this week. It's just like it's kind of been the Deebo Samuel thing. Like, last few weeks, like, it's all been all rushes and very few passes. But I think he could work if they get him on the outside. I think that we're probably tired about talking about Kyle Pitts, but someone's got to score. The Niners are really good against tight ends. As bad as they are against receivers with their outside guys, Al-Shaair and Fred Warner are really good covering tight ends. So just, he's a little bit different than a tight end that you normally face, and maybe he gets matched up against some DBs. But I'd probably go Gage if I had to go someone back with it. But I do think if you could pick the right pass catcher, I think that you got some upside here.
Agreed.
And what about we talked about stacks, we talked about mid-range receivers and all that, but what about the expensive running backs this week? It's a weird spot. We've got Ezekiel Elliott 7,300, Mixon 7,200, Najee Harris 7,800. Najee was really good last week, couple of touchdowns, but like, his longest rush of the season was last week at 23 yards. It hasn't been really explosive. You're looking for when you pay up here. Any of these 3 running backs you're going to go with this week between Harris, Mixon, and Zeke? Do you have a favorite among them?
Yeah, I think it's Harris. If not for Harris, just by himself, but sort of eliminating the other guys, I can't roster Zeke Elliott. Like, he just So without Pollard last week, we thought it was going to be a great spot for Elliott, but then they just bring in other guys. I mean, I don't know. He must not be healthy, because 12 carries again last week, and he's not busting off big runs. I mean, if you
he's not cheap. He's the second highest price running back on the slate.
Sorry, I'm going through his game log right now. In the last 6-7 weeks, he has an 11-yard rush and a 10-yard rush. Those are his longest runs in the last 7 weeks.
Doesn't have 70 yards in a game since week 5. Not 100 yards. He doesn't have 70 yards in a game since week 5.
Like, Zeke needs to get in the box twice, and of course he can do that. It's Dallas. They have a good offense. They should be inside the 10 quite often. But I'm just not going to rely on that. Najee Harris, I could go there just because it's a good matchup. He's catching passes. Like you mentioned, like, the rushing's been tough because the Steelers' offensive line is one of the worst in football. But we also don't have, the Jonathan Taylors, Eckler, McCaffrey, Dalvin Cook. There's none of them. So Harris does project for the most fantasy points of all the running backs. So I think it does make sense to roster Harris. And I don't think like he'll be overly popular because of the value. I mean, he'll be the most popular out of that 7K range, but it's not going to be crazy. And then Mixon, Yeah, I don't know. The argument for rostering Mixon is that I don't think anyone's going to roster him this week. And we had seen his salary get up to 8K because he'd just been crushing over 25 fantasy points in 4 straight weeks until these last 2, I don't know, sort of duds, I guess. But he's still seeing 20 touches a game. It's the matchup with Denver, though. It's not a great matchup, and that game is projected to be one of the slower games.
Yeah.
So I guess by process of elimination, Najee Harris is my favorite. I don't know. Do you have like anything to add, or do you feel differently?
I'd probably go Mixon, but I kind of agree with you most. I just like that Mixon touches the ball so much. But yeah, the game's going to be slow. I don't really want to play Zeke at the price, but I don't love this range this week. That's kind of what it comes down to. I think I'm going to play a lot of guys in the 5-6s range at running back and kind of pay up at other spots. But
me too. And then I just wanted to add real quick. You mentioned it just briefly, but I think this is a 4 receiver week. Meaning receiver in the flex instead of a running back. So I'm probably, for the most part, looking at 2 of these cheaper running backs that are in good spots. We'll have a few of them, and then rostering 4 receivers.
Yeah, I want to jump into those running backs in the mid spots here in a second. But first, a note from our sponsors at Yahoo DFS. The NFL season is fully heating up, and Yahoo is going big on daily fantasy football this season. There'll be a ton of big prize contests throughout the year on Yahoo, including their multi-entry contest now being shark-free. To celebrate Yahoo going big on DFS, as well as Yahoo Daily Fantasy becoming shark-free, Yahoo is giving all users the opportunity to claim a free $10 in site credit. Users can take advantage of this free $10 site credit offer to join any paid contest, including Yahoo's biggest contest, the weekly $1 million DFS NFL Baller Contest. The weekly $1 million contest features $1 million in total prizes, including first prize receiving $100,000 and a ton of overlay and prizes. Play daily fantasy football on Yahoo this season. Visit sports.yahoo.com/dailyfantasy/welcome to claim the free $10 offer to get started. So we talked about the expensive running backs and kind of mentioned that there's a lot of guys in the mid-range that maybe are more playable this week. So let's hit there. I mean, I think we talked about Eli Mitchell earlier. He might not play, but he's 6,200. Javonte Williams is 6,100, but Melvin Gordon's back. He was still really good last week, scored twice, but only played 49% of the snaps. That split is very real. Antonio Gibson at 6,000 let us down last week. He got a little bit game scripted out of that game, but we talked about Michelle. We talked about we talked about the guys that will be popular. We talked about the 5,400 guys with who was it? It was James Robinson and Rashad Penny. What else are you doing in this range? If you go away from Robinson, from Penny, from the Rams running back, is there anybody else down here that you like this week that you think is playable?
Yeah. You mentioned Gibson was a big letdown. I could go back to him only if McKissick is out.
Yeah, I think McKissick might be back, and I did the same thing. I was like, if McKissick's back, I don't think I want to play it.
Yeah, it's not the greatest matchup away to the Eagles, and yeah, if McKissick's back, I'll be off Gibson.
And by the way, Taylor Heineke just went on the COVID list too, so we're looking at either Garrett Gilbert, Kyle Shermer, or Jordan Ta'amu as their quarterback this week. So I think that makes me even more off. That scares me even more off Gibson, I think.
Wow, Kyle Allen's out too. Yeah, that's big trouble for that Washington offense.
Yep.
Yeah, okay, so no Gibson.
Sorry, I just saw that, so I wanted to jump
No. Yeah, glad you brought it up. Yeah. Okay, so where after Gibson? Yeah.
On the other side of that game, do you get into Miles Sanders at all? He's 5,800. That could be a game like now that we know the Washington quarterbacks are out. Like that could be an ugly game in terms of game script. He was 24 for 130 in his last game against before the bye, but that was without Jordan Howard and without Boston Scott. Those guys are both going to be back. The Washington football team does play the run well. I've been burned enough by Miles Sanders that I'm probably, with the other guys healthy, I don't think I can get there.
I totally agree. I would only have interest if Jordan Howard is out, and it seems like Jordan Howard's going to play. Elijah Mitchell being out again, like I think you could go to Jeff Wilson just because of the matchup. Like I really don't like that he doesn't catch any passes, but he does have 100 rushing yard upside and could score a touchdown. So I don't mind going there. I think an interesting cheap guy is Michael Carter coming back. He's going to be activated against the Dolphins. We've seen him pretty active in the passing game. He's looked good as a runner too. I like the salary, 4,700. But yeah, like nothing's standing out too much besides Robinson and the Rams. Like those look like such good options in that range. Yeah. I think you could go to Myles Gaskin. It has him on the COVID list right now, but if he comes back, there's a good chance he'll be the only running back one of the only running backs active for the Dolphins. And it's such a good spot against the Jets. And it also sort of helps his pass catching upside that Waddle's out. So it'd be a really good spot for Gaskin, who is a guy I normally don't like to roster, but everything's sort of pointing in his direction in that matchup.
So the only other guy I want to mention this range is someone that if you want in a tournament, if you want to get away from the chalkier guys in the same range, Dante Foreman is 5,200. He was very heavily involved last week before he got banged up a little bit. He only had 2 carries in the second half. He had 23 snaps, so he's limited snap count because he got banged up. But in those 23 snaps, 13 carries, 47 yards and a touchdown, 2 catches, also 15 yards. I get that Jeremy McNichols is there. I get that Dontrell Hilliard is there. This Pittsburgh run D has been absolutely thrashed lately. Last week, I'm just going to read this real quick. Dalvin Cook last week, 27 for 205, 2 touchdowns. Week before, Devontae Freeman, 14, 52 and a touchdown. Week before, Joe Mixon, 28 for 165 and 2 touchdowns. Week before that, Austin Eckler had 4 touchdowns. Week before that, DeAndre Swift had 130 rushing yards. Like, this is a run D that has been absolutely crushed the last 5 weeks. And then they looked like they didn't even want to be out there against Minnesota last week. Like, every time Dalvin Cook got the ball, I mean, Dalvin Cook is awesome. I'm not going to compare Dante Foreman to him in any way possible, but like he was running through like 5-yard holes. Like it was just, there's a couple of stills of that game where like Cook made one cut and there's nobody there. It was wild. It was like not getting touched for 15 yards. Like, I don't know what was going on there. Maybe off the long rest, Pittsburgh will fix this, but like, it's a great matchup right now. And Foreman was heavily involved before he got hurt. As long as he's fine, I think he is the guy. There's going to be some splits, if third down, he's going to come out of the game. But like, I think if there's a guy in the Tennessee backfield, it's Foreman. If they get rolling against this team, I think 5,200 is a really interesting and intriguing tournament play to maybe pivot off one of the chalk guys and get a little different this week.
Yeah, I'm on board with that. People will sort of get turned off by his low snap count and by the fact that they use 3 running backs. But like you mentioned, when he's in there, he's touching the ball. Yep. The matchup's great. Pittsburgh just getting shredded. And yeah, I agree with everything you said. Foreman's touches and snap count, I wouldn't be surprised to see them increase either. So yeah, I think that's a good call.
Yeah, I just think, if you want to get a little different, it's obviously way riskier than some of those the guys we talked about. They'd be popular, but I think it's a pretty good tournament spot. I want to hit a few more receivers here, but first a note from our sponsors at Thrive. Thrive is back for another season of fantasy football, and they're running huge guaranteed contests each week this NFL season. With Thrive Fantasy, you can eliminate the countless hours of research and focus on only the top-tier athletes that have the biggest impact on the game. Sign up today and get a free 6-month Rotowire subscription. Here's how you claim that subscription. Visit rotowire.com/thrive. Deposit a minimum of $10. Receive a 100% deposit bonus up to $100. And then finally, plan your first paid contest. After you do that, you'll receive a free 6-month Rotowire subscription. So we spent a lot of time talking about the expensive receivers, the mid-range receivers, who we like there. It's interesting. There's a couple of receivers this week that I think will be fully lost in terms of nobody's going to have them. Deebo Samuel is 8,200. I don't think anyone's going to pay that price, especially there's a lot of talk on Twitter. We mentioned earlier about the decreased targets, even though he's getting a lot of touches. But Deebo can always blow up. He can get a rushing touchdown and a receiving touchdown. I think maybe they focus a little more on him. I watched the game back last week, and Jimmy Garoppolo missed him for a touchdown once, missed him for a big first down play. Like, the plays are there. He's still running routes on all the routes, all the passes. It just didn't work out last week. Stephon Diggs, anytime you compare someone with Josh Allen, he's 7,700. We got this far. I haven't even mentioned him. And obviously, hasn't had the huge blow up year that he had last year, only 2 games over 100 yards. But, he had 13 more targets last week. Emmanuel Sanders is not playing. We talked about Gabriel Davis for that regard. But obviously, maybe helps Diggs a little bit too. I think the targets are always there. Maybe even a couple more. I don't think he's going to be popular at this price either. And then Jamar Chase is 7,100 in this range also. It just seems like everybody's going to either go Devontae or Cooper Kupp. If they want to get this range, Deontay Johnson, 7,500, and then there's so many guys in the mid-range. I think those 3 guys get pretty lost this week if you wanted to get them at a low percentage this week.
Yeah, me too. And myself, I plan on getting to some digs out of those
that's
guys.
the guy I like in the range too. I really like him at if you're going to get him at 5-6% at 7,700. I love that this week.
Yeah, I do too, and I think could make a lot of sense to roster Allen, Diggs, and Gabriel Davis. That 3,700 receiver helps you roster the most expensive quarterback and one of the most expensive receivers. So I know we didn't talk about the Bills stack, but that's a similar stack to the Arizona stack I mentioned. And the Bills might blow them out, but the Bills have lost 2 straight, and they keep their foot on the pedal into the fourth quarter.
I always love the focus on a good team that just lost too. Like, and they came back really well in that game. I think a lot of people thought they were going to get blown out, and all of a sudden they came back and probably should have won that game late. We could argue the questionable pass interference calls for a while there. It seemed like I'm never a conspiracy guy, but it seems like it was very weighted towards Tampa Bay in that game. But I think Diggs is the guy this week that you get a low percentage. It's a stud with a great quarterback. I think I love the spot for Stephon Diggs this week.
Me too. Yeah, that was.
We mentioned Davis and Devontae Parker as guys, and a little maybe safer and more involved than we usually see in the cheap range. Is there anybody else down here that's cheap? Say under 5,000. You mentioned AJ Green at 4,900. We already talked about that one. Is there anybody else down here that you like that maybe you can get away from from Davis or Parker to lineup? Is there anybody else down here that you think you're going to find yourself playing a bunch?
Off the top of my head, no. I'm kind of relying on you for that. The Parker and Davis just look so good to me, and
they do.
For the tournaments I'm playing, they make a lot of sense. But now I'm open to getting off of them in some of my lineups. Do you have any guys down here that you like?
I do. You're gonna get mad at me for even bringing them up.
Is it a Jaguar?
They both play for Jacksonville.
Okay, that's okay.
Marvin Jones is 4,600. He was 6 for 70 last week on 7 targets. This is a guy that's he's been good for a long time. I just think the price brings him into play. 4,600 is really cheap. I think Jacksonville's going to come out pretty pissed off this week. I think they're probably tired of doing interviews about Urban Meyer. I think they're probably happy that he's gone. I just think it's a spot, and they play Houston. We talked about James Robinson. It's a great matchup. So that means it's a great matchup for everybody else too. Houston's terrible. I weirdly think this game might get a little back and forth. I think it's going to kind of turn into a game where the both defenses are just so bad. Maybe we get some points. And the other guy is a guy we talked about last week, and he hasn't moved up at all. Is Laquan Treadwell. He's 3,300. He had 6 more targets last week, 4 for 68. If he played him last week, and I think he was 3,200 or whatever it was, 3,100. That didn't hurt you. That's double-digit PPR points, and you save a lot of money. He only played 44 snaps, less than the other 2 guys, but I think they're using him. He's in there, and he's got some upside too. He's got some explosion in his game. The last 3 weeks, for a guy who's 3,300, 53 yards, 62 yards, and 68 yards. You don't usually get that for someone that's down here. Usually we're getting a guy that, he had 65 yards once. Let's find a way to force him in our lineup because maybe he's going to blow up. But Treadwell's 3 weeks in a row. They're using him a bunch. I think they're going to pass the ball. They got nothing to lose here. So I think Jones is playable 4,600. I think Treadwell's playable 3,300. I can't really say I like them more than Davis and Parker, but if you're looking to get a little bit different, I think they're both very playable in a game that I think we see some a little more fireworks than we think. That total is really, really low. I like the over on the 39.5. I think that total's a little bit low for 2. I know the offenses aren't good, but I think the defenses are bad enough that we get some points there.
Yeah, I'm on board with that. After Urban Meyer got fired, the spread jumped a few points in Jacksonville's favor.
Isn't that crazy? It's awesome.
So that was interesting to see. Yeah, that's crazy. At 5,100, Trevor Lawrence, is in play for the largest field tournaments. Just to throw that in there since we're talking about Jacksonville. But yeah, no, I'm okay with those receivers. Treadwell especially. I can't remember. He either had a touchdown called back or went off his fingers. I can't remember. But yeah, the numbers on Treadwell look good, and I agree with you. Surprising to see his salary still that low.
Yeah, it is. So it's I think those are playable. Obviously, Parker and Davis are a lot safer, but you got to get a little spicy in some of these tournaments. What about tight end? We've kind of hit on a couple of guys. We've kind of gone through here talking about stacks and stuff. George Kittle been a monster lately, 150 plus yards in back-to-back games. He's 7,500 though. It's tough to get there at tight end. Where else are you going at tight end this week? Assuming you're not I know you don't usually pay way up at tight end. You talked about getting down low with Brock Wright in Detroit with Hawkinson out. Where else are you think you're going at tight end this week?
Yeah, I don't know that I'll get to Brock Wright, but he's an option down there. Yeah. Kittle, yeah, so Kittle being all the way up to 7,500. You're right. People just aren't going to roster him because of that. That makes me want to roster him a little bit more. We've talked about what a good spot this is for San Francisco, and Kittle's numbers are just crazy over the last
27 targets the last 2 weeks.
Oh, 150 yards receiving, 180 yards receiving, 3 touchdowns in that span. I mean, 37 fantasy points, 40. That will win you a tournament. So,
and I think he did. I think he did last 2 weeks. I think he was on both. I know he was on the lineup 2 weeks ago. I forget he was last week, but he has been winning a lot of money for people the last couple of weeks.
Yep, and he was on the lineup that won me a lot of money 2 weeks ago as well. So right. I will try to get to Kittle, but elsewhere, I think there's a lot of guys in the 5K range that are playable. It's a decent spot for Ertz against the Lions with Hopkins out. It's a good spot for Dawson Knox. Emmanuel Sanders being out helps that. I like Mike Gesicki probably the most in that range, just because of Waddle being out.
I think Waddle out helps him the most, actually.
Me too. So 11 targets in the last game against the Giants, but with Waddle out, I think we see 10 targets again for Gesicki. And a great matchup at home against the Jets. So Gesicki is probably my favorite. Next for me would be Higbee with Beckham out. I think it's a nice little bump to Higbee. And then I mentioned in that same game when we were talking about the stacks, like I wouldn't be on Gerald Everett, but if Lockett's out, that's a big enough bump to give me a little bit of interest in Everett. What about you, Scott? Who else for tight end?
You mentioned 2 of my favorites. I really like Gesicki this week. The Jets are allowing a league high 9.1 yards per target to tight ends. The matchup is great. I think Waddle out helps him the most, especially as we get inside the 20. Like usually that quick route they throw to Waddle, I think you get that to Gesicki. So I do really like him there. I like him to score a touchdown this week. I like Higbee too. I think 4,000 is really cheap for a guy in the Rams offense. He didn't play last week. Especially a false COVID, a COVID positive that was actually a false positive. He had 6 targets in the game before that, so they're using him a little bit. I think no OBJ helps him a lot too. The only other guy in this range you didn't mention that I do like maybe a little more than Knox and Ertz and Pitts. I do like Dallas Goddard again at 5,300. I think that Hurts has developed a rapport with him. He had 6 for 105 and 2 touchdowns last game before their bye. Targets last week are up and down, 8, then 3, then 6. But I think I think maybe they figured out that he's probably their best pass catcher. They've really struggled to kind of find a guy at receiver. They've gone to Jalen Reagor and Quez Watkins. Like they kind of cycle through. Devontae Smith is always there, but I do like Dallas Goddard this week at 5,300. The last guy I want to talk about is expensive. If I were to go up higher, I think I would go and save the $1,100. I'd go from Kittle to Mark Andrews. I don't think anybody's going to play him at 6,400, but he was 11 for 115 last week. Lamar would have to play for me to do it. I'd want him in there, although Tyler Huntley threw the ball enough to him also. But you look at his targets last 6 weeks. I think it's 10, 8, 10, 10, 9, 11. Like that's a lot of targets for a guy who's really good too. It's not like you're getting targets to a guy who's just kind of okay and going to get 40 yards with it. Andrews could do something with the ball. I think I'd take the $1,100 and play him over Kittle this week. As much as I love George Kittle as a fan of the Niners, if I were to go up top, it'd be Andrews, but I'm probably going to go down lower. I think Gesicki and Higbee are going to be on a lot of my teams. If you wanted to punt, you mentioned Brock Wright. Josiah DeGara in Green Bay is 2,700. He had some targets last week. Just a cheap piece of a really good offense if you wanted to punt the spot. I think him or Brock Wright work with a few targets if you want to get under 3,000 this week.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I guess I'll throw out one other guy under 3,000. Again, I don't know if I could get there, but Brevin Jordan on the Texans had 7 targets last week. Again, this would only be if I forget who their other tight end is, if he's out also. But yeah, I don't know. I'm probably not going to be in that range, but
right.
You like to mention when a guy has 7 targets and playing against Jacksonville. You mentioned that game might be a little bit more back and forth than people think. Again, though, I'll be a little higher. I'll be in a higher range than those guys, but I guess they're okay.
Farrell Brown, is that the other guy?
Yeah, Farrell. Yeah, like if Farrell Brown's out, that this other guy, I don't even remember his name, and I just said it.
Brevin Jordan.
Brevin Jordan, 7 targets, and he's been getting targets previously to that too. So I don't know. For 2,800, that's okay.
I like that too. I think that if you wanted to fully punt it, I think there are some options this week that maybe get you 4 or 5 targets. Real quick, we'll talk about defense. I think there's a couple that stick out for me, but I'll go with you first. I know you tend to be the guy who likes the cheaper defenses. Do you have any that you like this week? That's not very convincing.
Yeah. Jacksonville, I guess. Does that count? I mean, at home against the Texans is always a decent option. I think, the cheapest, we don't have the cheapest defense is 2,400 this week.
And Jacksonville's even 2,800, right?
Right. So $2,800 Jacksonville, it's only $400 more than the cheapest defense. So I'm okay with a home defense against the Texans, but I don't know. You give me something better.
If they were 300, I could get there, but you just go up $300, you get to both Buffalo at home against Carolina at 3,100 and the 49ers home against Atlanta at 3,100. The Bills D has been quiet lately. Their sacks have been not really especially exciting, but Carolina turned it over 3 times last week. They were sacked 5 times the week before that. They might be rotating quarterbacks. This feels like an old school Steve Spurrier college offense. You're going to go with some Cam Newton and some PJ Walker. I love that for a defense. I just don't like that idea in the pros in the NFL. I just don't think it works very well. And the 49ers, they have 9 sacks the last 2 weeks. Nick Bosa is on a mission right now. He wants to set the 49ers sack record. Get Aldon Smith off the record book, which would be a good thing for everybody involved. They forced 5 turnovers the last 2 weeks. Atlanta's got sacked 5 times against Tampa in week 13. Atlanta only has a couple turnovers the last couple weeks, but before that, they were really turning it over. I think at 3,100, both those are very playable. If I wanted to get under 3,000, I'd actually play Denver before I would play Jacksonville. They're 2,900. Cincinnati's allowed 11 sacks the last 2 weeks with 6 turnovers. I know they have an explosive offense. There's a lot of weapons there, but they have been a little loose with the ball. I know a couple of those were on kick returns last week, but they still count. But the 11 sacks what really stuck out to me. And I think Denver maybe be able to get after Joe Burrow a little bit, who still is not, has looked fine, but is not quite the mobile guy after the knee injury. So I think that Denver 2,900, 49ers 31, Buffalo 31 will be the 3 defense I'll kind of be cycling between this week.
Yeah. Okay. So you definitely sold me on. Those are great spots for the Niners and the Bills. I'm definitely going to try to find the 300 to move from Jacksonville to one of them. I will say, I think my favorite defense on the slate is now the Philadelphia Eagles. If Heineke on the COVID list, Kyle Allen on the COVID list, they're going to start a quarterback on the road who I've never heard of, most likely. So give me some Eagles defense this week as well.
Yeah, it's a hard to not like that with it. You get, if nothing else, you get a quarterback with a huge lack of experience, and maybe they just hand it off. But if they get behind, they're gonna have to do something. You got always like that. I think if you want to spend up, the Dolphins against the Jets obviously works. The Cowboys against the Giants, we're going to get another Mike Glennon the week this week. That works too, but it's hard not to just go Philly at that if you're going to pay up a little bit. But Philly works well. Buffalo, 49ers, Denver if you want to get lower, but I just don't think I think it's not low enough where to just not play the 49ers or Buffalo.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Anybody else you want to talk about? I feel like we've hit the slate pretty darn well here. Anything else that is on your mind or you want to discuss?
Yeah, no, I think we hit it pretty good. I got nothing.
Yeah, weirdly fun week, right? It's just there's not that big obvious game to play or 2 games to play, but it kind of opens up almost all the games. It's
I
funny.
love these weeks.
We talked about low totals, but we talked about players in the Jacksonville-Houston game. I think that I think when you get everything so compacted in, it really kind of brings almost all the games into play, and it's fun to kind of figure out which way to go because it's not super obvious, which I really like that when it happens.
Absolutely.
So thanks everybody for listening to the Rotowire Fantasy Football Podcast sponsored by WynnBET. We greatly appreciate you guys listening all year long. Hopefully it's not only been fun, but hopefully helpful in getting some good plays in your lineup. It's been a really good last 4 or 5 weeks for us. We kind of identified some really good plays, so it's been fun getting there. Ryan obviously won a bunch of money 2 weeks ago, so put the talk into action, which we always like to see. If you could please rate or review the podcast, helps that a lot. Helps people find the podcast. So always a very good thing. If you enjoy listening to us, or have been listening to us all year, can leave a bunch of stars. That'd be greatly appreciated. If you want to follow Ryan on Twitter, he is at RyanBelongia. I am at Scott Jenstad. Jenstad is Jenstad. As news breaks, and we obviously had the Washington quarterback news break during the show. As news breaks and we kind of adjust lamps and stuff, definitely hit us up on Twitter, ask us stuff there. We'll answer there. Other than that, hope everybody has a really good week 15. Happy holidays to everybody and all that. We'll be back at you next week. At some point next week, we'll talk about schedule. It gets a little weird, but we'll be back at you some point next week. Hope everybody has a good week. Take care.
Hey, thanks, Scott.